disaster comes in a moment. In the blink of an eye, without warning, sometimes disaster can come and change the lives of those it involves in simply a moment. 9/11, 2001 is a very, very big prime example of that. Over 2,000 people that day went to work not knowing that they would never again return home. Some were on flights, some were in the buildings, some were first responders responding to this disaster. August of 2005, anybody know which hurricane that is? Katrina, yeah. Changed the landscape of New Orleans rather expediently. At what was once a Category 5 hurricane, I think it made landfall as a Category 4. But New Orleans, it's kind of sits down in a bowl, was flooded and absolutely destroyed. Yeah, twice. Once in the southern part of Florida and once in New Orleans. November 17th, 2013. This was a tornado that struck not my hometown. My hometown's East Peoria, but this is Washington, Illinois, and actually a lot of my friends and people that I knew were living in these neighborhoods when this Category 4 tornado struck in November of 2013. Disaster can come in a hurry. Like more. Oklahoma has been hit repeatedly by tornado after tornado. This is just three examples. May 3rd of 99, May 10th of 2010, and then again on May 20th, 2013. Something tells me that the month of May is a tornado season around Oklahoma, right? I'm just saying. All three of these were Category 4 or 5 hurricanes. Category 4 or 5 tornadoes that totally destroyed things, and they had to be rebuilt. I bet everybody remembers this date too. Wednesday, April 19th, 1995. Yeah, it was the Oklahoma City bombing. My aunt was actually living in Oklahoma at the time. My uncle was working across the street.
I use that for my project. Yeah.
168 people died, including a lot of little children, because there was a nursery daycare right above where the bomb went off. Not only were there 168 dead, but there were 680 people injured that day. 168 people, 168 families whose lives were absolutely changed in a moment. Or what about this date? Thursday, April 12th, 2018. You remember that day? Yeah, see, I was meeting a couple of friends of mine actually that day. We were down in Weatherford eating at the Hibachi Buffet. And I was coming up 47 from Thomas, about to get to 183, and I saw smoke in the distance. Just a little puff of smoke. I was like, oh, kind of an odd day for somebody to be burning something. And what I was actually witnessing was the start of the Ray fire. I watched it all the way home, and about 12:40 p.m. was the first call of a fire near Ray. Did you know that the Dewey County fire is the largest single fire in Oklahoma history? It is. 286,000 acres is what it burned. Disaster can come without warning. Who knew when you got up that morning that within a weekend and within a week, half the county, 3/4 of the county would be burnt up. What about Noah and the flood? What about that disaster? See, disaster comes in a moment. Disaster comes in the blink of an eye. Things can change that quickly. Things can change just that fast. One moment you're going about life, and the next moment you're involved in such a disaster as we've lined out at any given moment with anything. One of the ones I didn't include in here was the tsunami. Japan, and there was another one in the Southeast Asia. There's all the time people swept away. Disaster comes in a moment. We're going to be in chapter 6 of Genesis this morning. We're going to talk about the flood. And before we talk about the flood, I need to kind of go through here and explain a little bit of one of the things that occurs in the middle of chapter 6, and that's in verse 9, actually. And verse 9 says this. It says, "These are the records of the generations of Noah." Bless you. This is what we actually call, it is a Hebrew, it's what's called a Toledoth, okay? And a Toledoth is a subscript or a close to the previous record. It's a Hebraic literary tool is what it is. And all a Toledoth is a subscript or close of the previous record. 6:9 is the close of the records of the generation of Noah. In other words, Noah wrote what was before that, and we can see through here from 1:1 to 2:4, it's the account of the heavens and the earth. 2:4 to 5:1 is the account of Adam. Adam is the one who wrote this down. 5:1 to 6:9 is Noah. 10:1 is Shem, Ham, and Japheth. 11:1 is Shem. And then you'll find some odd names of who recorded the rest of this stuff. Ishmael recorded a good portion of Genesis. Isaac recorded a portion. Esau has 2 Toledoths in 36:1 and 36:9. And then Jacob records the final one in 37:2. Moses takes it from there and writes the account of Joseph, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and what is thought that Joshua, after Moses' death, talking about Deuteronomy this morning, Scotty, it is thought that Joshua or Caleb would be the one that finished up the book of Deuteronomy. Genesis 6:5. Genesis 6:5 says this. It says, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." You think things now are bad? Holy cow. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. In other words, there was no good whatsoever. Verse 6 goes on, says, "The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." Verse 9, "These are the records of the generations of Noah." Thus ends Noah's recording and beginning the record of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, his 3 sons. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. What nice words to be said by your kids, right? Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Verse 11, "Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence." Okay, so the earth was corrupt. Every intent of the heart of man was only evil continually. The earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. Verse 12 goes on. He says, "God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth." You see, man had corrupted the earth. And as crazy as things are now, you ain't seen nothing. Because back in the day of Noah, it was only evil all the time. That is not an exaggeration. Now, part of this is because of the beginning part of chapter 6 and the Nephilim, right? And now it came about in 6:1 says, now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. From that point, man's got 120 years before God brings the flood. Verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. You see, the sons of God, these spiritual beings, take human form, mate with the daughters of men, which results in a race of men who are mighty men. You've heard of the tales of Hercules. How about Goliath? Goliath was 9'6". He was a Nephilim. It's where these people come from. Okay, that's the idea here. Is that it was not just man that had corrupted; it was these spiritual world sons of God, these lesser gods that came along and corrupted their way with man and influenced things. Verse 13. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth. God has noted that he is sorry that he has made the earth and everything in it. But as we find in verse 8, it says that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 14, 15, and 16. These are the instructions to Noah. God's already talking to Noah in verse 13. He continues in verse 14. He says, make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and finish it to a cubit from the top, and set the door of the ark in the side of it, and you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. So this is actually a picture of the ark encounter that was built by Answers in Genesis, and it is in Kentucky. We're not exactly sure how big a cubit is, and it varies anywhere from, I think it's 18 to 24 or 12 to 18? It varies how big is it. They measured on the larger side of the cubit, whatever that larger side is, whether, no matter what it is. So this is the bigger version of the ark. If you take a cubit and make it just a little bit, make it that 6 inches smaller, Noah's Ark will not be quite that big. But this is the measurement that they used in good faith. That's what they believe. That's what they honestly believe the size of it was. It was 3 decks. It was finished to the top. There was an air gap just before the top, right? It said it had 1 window, right? It's made of gopher wood. Okay. Verse 17 goes on, it says, behold, I, even I, am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life. From under heaven, from everything that is on the earth shall perish. God finally reveals to Noah how he's going to destroy the earth. He says he's going to bring a flood. And he says he's going to destroy all flesh under heaven. How do you feel when you get bad news? You get butterflies in your stomach. Kind of get those little twirly birds going on in your stomach. You just kind of maybe get a knot in the pit of your stomach. Can you imagine what Noah felt when God told him that he was going to destroy the entirety of the earth? I want to stop and think about the story of Noah from a human aspect for a moment. Because we have a tendency to sanitize the story of Noah. We put up cute little pictures of arks in nurseries, and he's got a boat with animals, and they all have this kind of smile, and everybody's happy. I've even seen one picture of Noah, and he's got a motorboat on the back, and he's speeding through the water, and I'm just like, do we not realize the amount of utter humanity in the story of Noah? Out of the entire population of the earth, 8 people made it out. 8. Some estimates are upwards of 10 billion people on the earth at that time. 8 people. Now, that number is give or take. I've seen estimates anywhere from 100,000 all the way up to several billion. Even northwards of 10 billion. 8 people out of that entire number made it out. Everything and everyone that Noah and his family knew was gone. His daughter-in-laws, families were gone. His friends, the people that he went and into town with and palled around with, are gone. The town that he knew was gone. The buildings, any of the structures that they had, the landscape was gone. There was nothing that was the same. Because if you actually look at some of the science behind the flood, the magnetic poles were all over the place, and it is the reason for the tectonic plate shifts so rapidly in the face of the earth. That's why the magnetic poles were all over the place, because the landscape was changing so rapidly and so fast because of the turbulence of the water. When that boat, we all think that Noah was on the boat for 40 days. He was not on the boat for 40 days. He was on the boat for 11 to 13 months. He did not see land for a year, close to it. That's a long time. I loved to cruise. But a year's a little much. Holy cow, get me off this boat. Can you imagine the sea legs that they had after being on that boat for that long? Everything and everyone they knew was gone. You talk about having to start over from scratch. When that boat put down on the Mount of Ararat, the landscape looked different. There was nothing there. He had to wait a long time just for the land to dry out. I think it was a better part of a month or 2, if not more. Have you ever been through a disaster? Have you ever been through a disaster? Have you ever had to start completely over? Whether it be a natural disaster, maybe a divorce even. That's kind of a disaster, right? Have you ever had to start over? You had family, you had friends, you had people rally around you. I remember when we first got here, there was a couple that had a fire down in Thomas, and the people that rallied around them, they had so much stuff coming out of their ears. It was, they had clothes and pots and pans and everything. Oh my gosh, they had tons of stuff. Noah and his family did not have that. They had to start over from scratch, like quite literally from scratch. The trees were just now growing again. Verse 18. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and every living thing of all flesh. You shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you, and they shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, and of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing on the ground after its kind, 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, and gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and food for them. Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him, so he did. You see, God is giving him instruction. He's saying, Noah, I am going to make a covenant with you. You and the 8 people, you and your wife and your sons and their wives, 8 people, you get on the ark. Because I'm establishing my covenant with you. He says 2 of everything is going to present themselves to you, Noah, and you are to put them on the ark. We always, and here's another misconception about Noah's ark, is the idea that only 2 of every animal got on that ark. That is not the case. There were 2 of every animal, but 7 of every clean animal. Why is that? What's the first thing Noah did after he got off the ark? He sacrificed. Yeah, exactly. There were 7 of every clean animal. If you have something to be thankful for after God bringing you through a disaster, good time to sacrifice. Just saying. just throwing that out there. So there were 2 of everything, but 7 of every clean animal. That's referenced in actually chapter 7, verse 2. God gets a little bit more specific. He says that the birds, the animals, and creeping things are going to present themselves. You don't have to worry about the water-based animals because, well, there's going to be tons of water. Not going to have to worry about that. They're gonna be okay and they're going to survive. But all of the birds, all the creeping things, the animals, all of these things are going to present themselves to you, Noah. You need to keep them male and female to keep them alive. He also says that you need to take for yourself of food that is edible and take it for them as well. It's going to be food for you. It's going to be food for them. And I have a tendency to think that some of these animals would have probably been infants or at least what you would call a toddler, just smaller, don't eat quite as much. It would be a lot more practical because they're on the ark for a year. That's a lot of stores for a year. Verse 22. When you combine this with Hebrews 11, let me flip back here to Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11 says this of Noah. 11:7 says, by faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence, prepared an ark for salvation, for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness, which is according to faith. See, it was by faith Noah believed all of this stuff. By faith, he hadn't seen any of this. There are arguments that are made that it had not rained on the earth because the water came up from the ground every evening and watered the earth. There's this idea of there. But there'd not been a flood on the scale, and not before and not since. Noah hadn't seen any of this. He starts building a boat. Can you imagine the people making fun of him? 120 years of prophesying that God is going to destroy the earth. They probably thought he was plumb nuts by the time it came around. And then can you imagine the screams when the door of the ark is shut and it begins to rain and flood? Noah, let us in. You were wrong. You were right. We were wrong. It's a little too late. It's a little too late. Noah believed and followed the instructions that God gave him. It was because Noah believed God and what God said he was going to do. You see, right now in our country, people are thinking and feeling the same thing about our country. They are genuinely afraid that an utter disaster is coming. The divide is great. Doesn't matter whether you ride on the side of the extreme left or the extreme right, people are genuinely afraid on both sides. People on the left are afraid that Trump's going to pull a coup and he's going to come in and he's going to take over control of the government. On the opposite right side, you've got fear and domination of what the left side now being in control of both House and the Senate and the presidency. They're in utter fear of what the left is now going to do. Doesn't matter what extreme you go to, people are absolutely, utterly scared and frightened that disaster is coming to this nation. They're afraid that they're just going to have nothing and they're going to have to start over. I don't know that any one of them, either side necessarily is wrong. I don't know that they're right, but I don't know that they're wrong either. Because the fact of the matter is the divide is great in this country. And let me tell you what, if you look through history, you will find very quickly, especially in the Roman Empire, what our government is modeled after fell because of internal strife. They tore themselves apart from the inside. It is all that much more important that we as in the church stop kowtowing to the extremes and we rally around this thing right here. We rally around the Word of God. We rally around Jesus Christ. We rally around as the church around the Word together to encourage each other, to build each other up, to make disciples, to be together in fellowship. Because let me tell you what, disaster comes without warning. You never know when or where. Sometimes it happens with warning and sometimes it doesn't. But rest assured, disaster will come. It's going to happen. It is going to happen. One way or another, disaster always comes. But here is the crux of the matter. Even if God doesn't change the disaster, God still rescues. Even if God doesn't change the disaster, God still rescues. He didn't change the disaster for Noah. He had to walk through the disaster. Is it any wonder that Noah after the flood planted a vineyard and got drunk? Is it any wonder? Can you imagine the survivor's guilt? Like seriously. Oh yeah. The stress of what he had been through. Talk about trauma. And there's no counselor. It's you and God. It is no wonder that Noah reacted the way he did. It doesn't surprise me at all, as a matter of fact. He's human. But God did not change the disaster for Noah. He did not change it. But I guarantee it changed him. God will still rescue even in the midst of disaster. He may not change it, but there's usually something to learn. And even if death does come in disaster, if you're a child of God, you got nothing to worry about. It's not a big deal because, as Paul says, to live is Christ, to die is gain. I'd much rather be with Christ, but it is more necessary for me to be here with you. That's what he was telling the Philippians, as a matter of fact, in the first chapter. It's more necessary that I be here with you at the moment. Where are you at this morning? I don't know, you know, you go back through some of the disasters that I was talking about earlier, the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11, the fire here locally. You start off on a big wide scale and you kind of get closer to home and closer to home and closer to home. And disaster does strike close to home. It does. I don't know where you were or what kind of disasters have come in your life, but let me tell you what, God still rescues even in the midst of disaster. We love to blame God for why did God do this? You know what? God doesn't have to answer that question. He's God. Were you there when he created? No, he wasn't. So hush. He's God. God still rescues. He is still good. He is still gracious to rescue us even in the midst of disaster when he does not change the circumstances.